Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Mother's Justice Show on 1150 KKNW. I'm your host, Sylvia Feliciano, founder of Solace Mind, sitting in for the incredible Reverend Harriett Walden, the founder of the Mother's Justice Show. Many of you know Reverend Walden as the founder of Mothers for Police Accountability and a deeply respected leader whose unwavering commitment to justice has made her the most influential voice for police accountability in the Pacific Northwest. I want to honor her leadership and the powerful impact she has had and continues to have in this region. And as we just had a discussion today, she is a weaver and healer, weaving healing, spirituality, and advocacy for our community. I'm truly honored that Reverend Walden has invited me to be a part of this show and sit in for her because I also lost a son last year, in part because of the gaps in care and support when he sought help. Our healthcare and mental health system are full of gaps, some built by design and others the unintended consequences of long-standing racial inequities creating a fractured and broken system. The result is a system that too often fails the people who need it most, leaving communities without the care and support they need and deserve. Because of this, we want to raise awareness and provide critical information to help our communities navigate these systems, access care, and advocate for themselves and their loved ones. Mental health is complex, and for individuals and families experiencing a crisis, the process of seeking help can be overwhelming and even frightening at times. But the reality is we don't have to be in crisis to feel the weight of these uncertain times and what's happening around us today. Stress, anxiety, and daily changes affect us all. There are tools and strategies that can help us stay grounded, present, and resilient. This show is about empowerment, healing, and most importantly, community. Coming together as a community is essential because change happens when we unite, share knowledge, and support one another. When we create safe spaces to discuss mental health, advocate for equitable healthcare, and uplift those in need, we begin to dismantle the barriers that prevent healing and progress. No one should have to navigate these challenges alone. By fostering connection, we build strength, resilience, and collective power that enables us to demand better systems and resources, as well as care for ourselves, our loved ones, and future generations. And let me pivot here for a moment before we get to our guest and say that if ever you're feeling like you need someone to talk to, but don't feel like you can reach out to anyone, please call 988. Someone will be there to just talk to you. They're there to listen about anything you want to talk about and without judgment. Together, we can explore mental health, crisis response, advocacy, and practical ways to care for ourselves and support one another in meaningful ways in our community. I'm grateful to be here, and I'm looking forward to these important conversations that aim to empower, educate, and inspire action. I'd like to welcome our first guest, Christina Thomas. Christina is an accomplished advocate, executive leader, champion for military sexual trauma survivors, and trauma recovery expert, dedicated to veteran mental health and community empowerment. As chair of the Southern Nevada Veterans Mental Health Advocacy Council, founder of Living Free Souls LLC, and president of the Veterans Advocacy Council CDC, she has advanced holistic healing, medical cannabis access, and trauma-informed care at local and national levels. A kidnapping survivor and VA integrative medicine patient, Christina leverages her personal experiences to drive legislative reforms, advise national entities, and lead grassroots initiatives, including crisis intervention and suicide prevention, intervention, and postvention efforts in collaboration with NAMI Nevada and the Governor's Challenge. Her extensive academic credentials, congressional recognition, and groundbreaking multicultural advocacy have positioned her as a prominent voice in mental health policy and veteran support services. I met Christina through our wonderful friend Danielle Monroe Marino when I lost my son Joshua, and I can't tell you how supportive and what a true friend she has been to me in my darkest times this past year. Thank you, Christina, for welcoming us bring with us today.
Blessings, love, and light to you, my Sylvia, my sweetness. I want the audience to know that this is going to be a beautiful conversation. I want them to get comfortable with seeing things in just a free-form conversation, because we're never too far removed from being the person on the other end of the call. I want to thank you so much for your vulnerability and for your advocacy and the years of service that you have brought as a veteran, as a mother, as a friend, as a leader, as a provider, as a healer, as a woman that is after God's heart, that is after the very thing that we all seek to find, which is love. Love and light and being a blessing where God talks to, through, and for the people. Thank you so much for the introduction. Where do we start?
Well, tell us a little bit about your story.
Oh,
it's a fascinating one.
Yes. Wow, Sylvia. I am a 4-time over suicide survivor, and I started this because of those gaps in services that Sylvia was discussing, and also giving a lot of grace to. I'm a 20-year integrative holistic patient that started during the opioid crisis. My suicides were medication-induced. From that, all of this started because I am a 2-time over kidnap survivor and rape survivor, a military sexual trauma, and the moral injuries and the intersectionality of being a woman of color, being a Black woman specifically in a society that did not see me as a part, whether it was societal norms or whether it was the norms of militarization, the intersectionality of coupling in indigenous practices that I was raised upon, and moral values that were instilled in being able to serve the community and family beyond yourself, no matter the adversity, the trials. I was raised to have the pillar of life as your truth is your spirituality, your truth, your purpose. After my kidnappings and rapes, my mind-body connection was so very strong. I have always been in the church, and I didn't have answers for this. It wasn't a prayer. It was so much more that was needed. Those prayers were needed, but there was more. And nobody had taught me that. So I just, like most of us, bottled all of that up, kept all of this, just wrote in my journal. Journaling was a modality that was always instilled. And I wrote and created, and I just kept pushing things down without taking into regard that I was degrading, imploding, exploding, anything and everything in between. And from that process, I fell into mental illness. I fell into psychosis. I fell into losing myself, the identity in which the blueprint God had created me to be. And I had taken on identities of trauma and projected those traumas into my everyday life. The unfolding happened with evidence-based therapies in 20 years, week after week, group after group, modality after modality, and still there was more because of the intersectionalities that were needed. Becoming a trauma expert meant that it was more than just healing myself and knowing what it was to heal me. It was the hundreds and thousands of veterans that sat in those groups after groups after groups after groups, and I began to learn patterns and behaviors and frequencies and energies. Not only was I in those groups healing thyself, I was then outside of groups still doing and being a provider. And so as those groups were growing, these groups were growing, and my advocacy to fight for myself, even though I wasn't able to fight for myself while I was active duty, I was able to fight for myself when I got out through the women that were facing those very issues that I was going through. So I could take the energies and lessons from what I had learned through the VA healthcare system and regular healthcare systems and 6 different specialty care, and couple the evidence-based therapies through holistic practices and modalities, and the healing mechanisms that I saw were beneficial to more than myself through evidence-based therapies, and give it to them. And then find other providers in the community at local and state levels that were funded in case they weren't fully benefited, in case that gap happened. Then I became a multi-congressional district advocate, just taking in all of these different cases that were coming from, as your dear friend, my dear friend, Assemblywoman Danielle Monroe Moreno, she takes in these cases. She knows these individuals, and she's like, Chris, there's no answer here. Do we have it? And so being a private advisor and a public advisor to individuals that hit a wall and there's no answer, and being this light of, but she could, so I know there's hope. I want to always remain that. I am no different than the individuals that are outside my window off of 4th Street, downtown Las Vegas. I'm one decision away from their active psychosis that they are experiencing. One car accident, one medication, one episode, one experience, one prayer I missed away from becoming a victim of circumstances. So instead of becoming a victim, I became victorious in the light and allowed God to flow to, through, and for me, and those that I've been blessed to meet, to grow from. Because in the evidence that we saw through psychosocial education and the years of study and psychoanalysis, we are all mirror neurons learning, unfolding from one another, and we each have our purpose fully to answer a question within ourselves for someone else too. So I hope that kind of explains the cases that came years upon years upon years of talking to individuals like yourself. Crisis case management comes in many forms, whether it's the human trafficking cases, whether it's sexual trauma, whether it's rape, whether it's domestic violence, whether it's self-harm, whether it's cutting, whether it is substance abuse, substance use. All of those play a part in the intersectioning of how do I heal. There's a road for each one of those, and sometimes they don't cross. Sometimes you got to stay on this path, then you got to get over into this lane, then we get down on that, then you got to get over to that. What we like to see local, state, and federal is to work it together to where it's a one-stop shop, and you don't have to interrupt your recovery and rehabilitation process. Each time that you interrupt the process of healing, there's a pathway that continues to grow from your past. And so what we would like to give the energy of count it all joy, just keep on this road. It's our road of Damascus, if you will. Keep down the road, keep the faith, and that faith and hope that we have deep buried, that we know is beyond this world, is what keeps us even when the circumstances show that it's not working, because we are choosing the light. And sometimes we have to keep pushing through the darkness with all these modalities to make it work for us.
Absolutely. And your story is so inspiring. And you have been a source of light for me throughout this entire year. You've worked on really important reforms. And I wanted to ask, in what ways have lived experiences such as yours influenced meaningful policy changes, not just around veteran mental health, but mental health generally, especially for marginalized, underrepresented, and historically underserved communities?
Yes, these living experiences, one thing that we could say about our society is we do have the data. You have research facilities like Cleveland Clinic, UCLA, University of Pennsylvania, Harvard University, Johns Hopkins University. You have all of these individuals that have this data collected on a national level of mental health without taking the full representation of the country that was not spoken for. And we could see that from Harvard professor and Harvard researchers, Dr. Linda Ann Clayton, with the medical health dilemma from the inception of American history into it, and how Black America was not included into the medical other than being subject test matters. And when we look at what that looks like for us, if we were never looked at as a part of a healthcare system, and you're being taught in a healthcare system, and things are being repeated up until this date by individuals sitting in positions that Blacks aren't the same, you still carry the ignorance that excludes that we are one human race, ethereal human race. We are spiritual beings having a human experience with all the shades of melanin. And yet we have a medical system that says that Black and brown aren't to be researched accordingly the same, where women themselves have actual medical prescriptions that are studied by middle-aged white males. This is where we go wrong from the jump. So these living experiences, like myself, as the woman that was never included, gets to say, how many times was I denied service because you said that I was overreacting? How many women were denied service when I told you, I'm not feeling okay with this new medication?
Right.
It's making me feel funky. Can you do something with this dosage? How many lives have been taken because they've been ignored, because they've been taught by a professor who was proportionately directed through medical research to think that you are not to be considered equal? Inequality within the research, inequality within the treatments, inequality within the very beginning of how we came about with medical studies.
Right.
Mental health had still not been incorporated as an integrative medicine solution. We were treating the body, and everything is controlled in the mind. And the soul, the essence of the person, was left out completely. Where spirituality and science was divided, where you cannot divide spirit and science because it is one, in the development of the ethereal, astrological, down to the very essence of the earth and the elements, we are all one in God omnipresence. And nothing in creation is apart, nor can the mind be separated apart from the body. It is the very essence of how we flow. Our body just happens to be the very tool to let us know when this isn't acting accordingly. And all of it goes back to self-accountability of what have I consumed that has created toxicity within the mind and the body. What did I see, touch, taste, feel, experience, and embody within my soul that was out of alignment? It is not our fault what happens to us outside, but as I spoke this weekend, it absolutely is our responsibility to heal accordingly and to ask and to go into meditative space of being in an understanding, not just an understanding of what it is we need and what our creator source is guiding us to become.
Thank you. How does the community I know for myself, growing up, I was raised in the church. And so we didn't have mental health awareness. Therapy was not a thing. And so when I lost my mom at a young age of 23, and I had just had my son Joshua, who passed away, he was 10 days old when my mom passed away. I didn't know I experienced postpartum depression. Right. And I have all these symptoms. I have the memory loss, the brain fog. I even stuttered for a short amount of time. And so those were not conversations that we had. So how do we reduce the stigma and encourage our family members, our loved ones, to seek mental health support before we go into a crisis?
That's so good that you brought that in. Let's segue what we just said with how do we take living experiencing. So from the living experience of me saying, you counted me out, here is my story. From that policy here was SB 69, where we were doing peer support, where the living experience of someone that's been through it, gotten through the recovery and rehabilitation, also letting the person know, here's the gap. Well, after that kidnapping, and when I finally did the addressing of my issues, I went to church. And I got religious trauma because I went to church, because that's not a mental health facility. And so I was told that I was a witch, how I was going about my way of praying and meditating and doing the proper process in which I'm taking in my light, this isn't working. Prayer isn't work. So I need more. And then I'm given scripture and told that I'm evil and that I've done something to create it. So what happens when religious persecution isn't religious persecution in that way? It becomes religious trauma because that person isn't equipped. You can only receive what you perceive. And if you're not using all areas of your brain and knowledge, and you're just staying in the spiritual minded, you could be so spiritually minded, you are no earthly good. And so we have to come back down to being the human beings and saying, this living experience is true indeed. Let me take this person for who they are and understand what other areas outside of me that God has created can fill the gaps where I am not equipped. So what we've done is I went to those leaders and I said, you need mental health providers that are trained, certified. The pastor is the pastor. That is the guide. That is the one that has the honorary duty to the cloak, to what it means to be that leader of flock, of the sheep. The individuals, it is not the deacon, it is not the usher board, it is not those individuals, but yes, they can be trained. Someone's capacity does not mean that they have the tenacity and the skill set to keep up with it. We need to understand that. That may not be, we may want to help, but we could do more harm than good by stepping in areas that we are not trained, culturally competent in, and trauma informed in. So our efforts is to be able to tell faith leaders, this isn't your world of responsibility. Focus on the faith. Let the mental health providers focus on the psychology and the anatomy and physiology of chemicals that are going on in pharmaceutical treatments. So that's the way that I feel was the best way to address that living experience, where I was getting case after case where people were running to church. So now I said, okay, let us equip the church with the individuals that are experts in these areas. If they're going to church and they're going for faith, then let us have the organizations. There's a nonprofit there. Then let's see how we can build out the nonprofit to better equip with peer support coordinators and doctors that are on call when they get that substance use, when they get that domestic violence, when they get that kidnapped survivor, when they get that person that is in trial and turmoil that is beyond a prayer. They have the actual expert there to refer them over to better secure that there's no gap in care.
What I hear you saying, thank you so much for that. So what I'm hearing is that we must have our faith and spirituality. It is incumbent, it is critical to be grounded in a strong faith and spirituality, but make space to be able to also incorporate mental health, wellness, and self-care, and not be embarrassed or afraid to reach out for help.
Yes, absolutely. We can't allow the stigmas to continue that have been poured within the churches to put a blanket on it as evil, when there is so much within the scripture that shows us there is so much more that comes along with this, so much more than to help someone see that you can have your spirituality, your faith, as well as your whole health, integrative health care.
And I want to put in a plug for a local support that we have here, led by Ashley McGirt. She is the founder of the Therapy Fund Foundation, which provides free mental health services to the Black community members. Just quickly, if you can share one or two strategies and tools that you use as self-care. Christina?
First things first, prayer. Yes, prayer is a tool. Prayer is more than a tool. It's a part of my livelihood, if you will. So it's a part of it. But outside of something that was in there was using evidence-based therapies like journaling, being able to write things thoroughly at the end of the day, self-soothing, somatic healing, tapping. I've used different modalities deeper than meditation and guided imagery, biofeedback. I could go on and on and on about different tools that I switch out for different levels of elevated emotions. Each one I've learned through time addresses me a little differently for the time that it's in. So I don't want anyone to think it's a one size fit all or you got to have one thing. I interchange them kind of like people interchange their little jewels on their Crocs. So it depends on the day and how you want to address what do I feel today. Today is just a little more intense with these cases. I'm going to have to do some water therapy today, submerge and do some sound healing with water therapy and then go into meditation. So hopefully that helps some folks to know there's many tools for you to do.
So many. And I truly hope that our community reaches out. I encourage them to reach out. We're going to take a little break here, and Christina's going to stay with us because she actually knows and works with our next guest. Thank you, Christina, for being on the show.
The Mother's Justice Show is brought to you by H.G. Walden and the Virtues Healing Circles. Join us for Wisdom and Wellness with Reverend Walden, a monthly virtual and in-person healing circle that focuses on community healing and growth. Learn more at virtueshealing.com. That's virtueshealing.com. Also, be sure to join our healing group on Facebook. Again, visit us at virtueshealing.com today.
Market Street Shoes is happy to sponsor the Mother's Justice Show in honor of our mother, Jackie Higgins Rosebrook, who spent her life fighting for social justice, and also in honor of all mothers who fight for social justice. Market Street Shoes, fashionable footwear and apparel for life's everyday adventures, in the heart of Ballard since 2006. Visit marketstreetshoes.com.
Hello again. You're listening to Mother's Justice Show on 1150 KKNW. Thank you for supporting the show. Coming back, we are now welcoming Dr. Sheldon Jacobs. He's a licensed mental health professional, educator, and nationally recognized advocate with extensive experience serving diverse populations, including juvenile probationers, first responders, professional athletes, such as the Las Vegas Raiders, and individuals facing mental health challenges. With interests in sports and forensic psychology, Dr. Jacobs provides individual, group, and family therapy and teaches at the community college, undergraduate, and graduate levels. Appointed by Governor Steve Sisolak in 2019 to the Nevada State Board of Examiners and elected in 2022 as the first Nevadan to serve on the NAMI National Board of Directors, he is also the president of the NAMI Southern Nevada Board of Directors. Dr. Jacobs founded and chairs a coalition to increase mental health provider diversity and access in underserved communities. I was fascinated about his memoir, 48, an experiential memoir on homelessness, and I hope we have some time to touch on that later. But he also has a Las Vegas Review Journal column, Mental Health Matters, reflecting his commitment to raising awareness and breaking stigma. Dr. Sheldon Jacobs' work has been recognized on local, state, and national levels. I first met Dr. Jacobs in Minnesota at the NAMICon, and excited to learn we are in the same circles. You actually know Christina Thomas, who we just spoke with, and she's going to stay on the show and come back a little later. But it just comes full circle, and we're so grateful that you are on the show today. Thank you for being here.
Yes, no, it's an honor. Thank you for having me on the show. I mean, you have a great podcast voice. Like you're meant to do this. So, I salute you for everything that you're doing as well.
Thank you so much. Can you tell us a little about yourself and the work that you're in?
Yes. I think so. I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist, by trade, but I am an advocate at heart, and a lot of my work centers around creating access to individuals, especially individuals from marginalized communities. So people of color, individuals from just various backgrounds, especially backgrounds where individuals have been marginalized. I try to come in and provide the access to where to be, if mental health support groups, if it's therapy, if it's finding a psychiatrist. A lot of my work, involves that. And that's kind of where my passion is, because we all know that, accessing, especially mental health services and supports, is very, very challenging, and it shouldn't be that way. It
Absolutely.
shouldn't be, and so for the life of me, I can't sort of put my fingers around why it is so challenging. But that's one of the things that I feel been in position to do is to get more people involved and connected to the help that not only they need but that they deserve.
Thank you for that. And you remind me of the conversation that we first had at NamiCon. We discussed this very thing, how there isn't a huge representation in the field itself. And so I wonder, what advice would you give to young people of color considering entering mental health field? Because there is a crisis right now, and we don't have people enrolling in the field. And with the crisis building, what advice would you give?
No, I would say, I mean, first off, I mean, it's a very rewarding profession. It's a profession where, you are in position to help people that are in need, and whatever that might look like. But I think the other thing is therapy is something that you can do. So being a therapist, being a counselor, is something you can do, like all your life. Uh, and
Yeah.
so it's a great field. A lot of people, retire into this profession as well. But you're right. I mean, unfortunately, there isn't a whole lot of representation when it comes to providers in the mental health sector. And one of the things that I've done here in Las Vegas was I created a um, a coalition, if you will. Some people, use the term network, but I created a coalition of clinicians of color, where we come together, we support each other. Also, one of the big pieces of this coalition is we also go about trying to get more people of color into the field. So I know oftentimes myself and some of my colleagues will go out and speak at schools about the field. We'll go to, especially schools like in our inner city areas or our communities, where there's a lot of need. We'll go into those communities and we'll talk about the field of mental health and what it means to be a therapist, what it looks like, what you need to do in order to get on track, to meet the requirements. So that for me is like my passion, something that I just love to give back, and it's a way for me to give back to my community.
I love that. I love that. And you're so right. I entered and now pursuing a degree in mental health counseling. I'm 1 year in, and I'll start my practicum and my internship later this year. And I just can't believe it's gone by so fast already. But I remember when I lived in Las Vegas, I would go to Ty's place, the safe place for teens.
Yes.
And I was so excited because I would bring my singing bowls and do yoga with the youth there and teach them how to play the singing bowls and meditation. And one family, the children were from two families. And I recall not being able to take my regular course and provide it to them. It was a different demographic. They were Mexican children, and they were not receiving the yoga and the curriculum that I had developed with the other children that had been teaching there. And I remember having to meditate because I didn't know how I was teaching this demographic who were not receiving this information, right? And then I remembered I have Don Miguel Ruiz's book, The Four Agreements, in my car. And I brought it in and I started to read it to them when I gave them a 10-minute meditation. And then I started going into who Don Miguel Ruiz is and how his book is,
Wow.
Translated in over 50 countries, and their eyes lit up. And it truly fascinated them to the point where I had purchased 13 books from Amazon for them the next day. They all took a book home. And this is at an age where children don't, like reading books, right? Because they ranged from 10 to 17. And so they took books. They wanted to take books to the family, to their family members. And it showed me that even in a children's heart, if you know the language they speak, and when you speak to their heart, you can really reach them.
Yes.
And when I went through the meditation and during their meditation, I had them in Savasana. And as they're laying there and I'm reading these stories from the four agreements, you can just, they were so entrenched in listening. And it was something that was so gratifying to see. And they wanted to learn how to play the singing bowls. They wanted to learn the yoga. It changed the whole dynamic.
Wow.
And it was powerful. It was incredibly powerful. So mental health is really for everyone, especially when you're representing, when they see that representation, they gravitate towards that healing. And so I knew, especially after Joshua, I mean, I had been in the crisis response work. I was involved in the city of Seattle's first care program. They have the CRT team, but their care program is the first that has been dispatched by 911, dispatching behavioral health specialists.
Wow.
Instead of the police. It's just like that alternative response. So I was proud to be a part of the development of that program. And then I went on for a short stint to be the program manager of the crisis intervention training for first responders for King County here in Seattle. But when I lost my son, I realized, and he had called out for help himself, I realized that we don't have as much representation. And so how do you bring that cultural responsiveness into your teaching and to the community so that we are pulling more folks into this field?
Well, first of all, Sylvia, I want to say, and I meant to say this earlier, I'm sorry for the loss of your son. I can't even begin to imagine. And the fact that you're here, still giving back, to others is huge. It's a testament to who you are, as a person, as a human being. So thank you for just really turning your pain into purpose. In terms of, and that's I'll say that's a very interesting question that you pose because, I think when I was coming up and going through my graduate education, like I was never taught, what being culturally responsive was or what it looked like. I took a multicultural class, and it still did not, put me in position or others in position, like my cohorts, in position to be more informed culturally. And so I think, for me and for any clinician, no matter, what racial background you come from or ethnic or cultural background, you identify with, I think it's important that, you immerse yourself in as much, diversity as possible, in as many, experiences as possible. And so for me, when I was going through my doctoral internship, I was living in Southeast San Diego, California, inner city community called Southeastern San Diego. And it was a very large Hispanic population or Latino population. And one of the things that I did because I knew I was going to be working in this community, and so one of the things that I did was I forced myself to learn as much Spanish as possible. So every day when I came home from school, I would watch novelas on TV, so Spanish soap operas, and I would for maybe sometimes up to 3 hours a night. And so this is like after I've come home, I've studied, my studying, my reading for the night, and it's 12 o'clock, 1 o'clock in the morning, and I'm here trying to learn Spanish. And for me, that helped me to be in a better position to be a little bit more culturally aware and culturally sensitive, with some of the clients that I was working with and some of the families I was working with. And I think at the end of the day, they respected that. I wasn't like super, fluent in Spanish, but I was definitely, I could communicate in Spanish, and I was, I could consider myself to be somewhat fluent because I could understand what, my families were saying, and they could understand what I was saying, in Spanish. And, so that was very important for me. And again, it's for us as providers in particular, doing what we can to be able to put ourselves in positions to be as culturally responsive as possible. And I'm not saying you need to go learn another language, but what I am
Absolutely.
saying is important that you immerse yourself as much as possible with various cultures and different types of people from different walks of life, because that would give you a little bit of a better understanding. And the last thing, Sylvia, I want to say to that is, so over the last few years, I've been working with more unhoused clients, and about 5 years ago, I took it upon myself to, to do the homeless experience. But I went on uncover as a homeless man for, for 48 hours and ended up writing a book about it. And that was important for me because I just wanted to kind of get a sense. I mean, obviously 48 hours is not, a real indicator of what it's like to be unsheltered, right? But I wanted to kind of to sense, have a sense of what it might feel like, or what it might be like, and so for me, that helped me to become a better clinician. Just having some general understanding of various things, putting
Absolutely.
myself in
Yeah.
other people's shoes, in a way that I could have some greater understanding of their own challenges.
Absolutely. Yeah. I'm glad you raised that because can you tell us what your memoir, 48 Hours, is about and what that experience really taught you and how that also influences you as a therapist?
Yes, absolutely. So 5 years ago, and at the time, a lot of people thought I was crazy for doing this because there was a man in downtown Las Vegas that was going around and shooting unsheltered people randomly for no reason. And unfortunately, several unsheltered individuals were killed as a result of this senseless act. And so around the same time frame, I wanted to, something was pulling in my heart to do something for this population, and I didn't know what that was. And so I prayed about it, I thought about it, and finally, it was revealed to me that, to put myself out there. And
Mm.
so I alluded to, or I opted to, to go out and for 48 hours, no money, no phone, no anything, just to really try to experience, what it was like during that time frame. And I did this. It was towards the end of the summer in Las Vegas. So we know that Las Vegas gets really hot. So this is like early September. So it was still triple digits. And it was a very difficult experience to say the least. And there was a part of me that didn't know how I would come back in terms of what things would look like for me because of the risks that were involved. I had no money, I had no food, I had no anything. And so by God's grace, I was able to, survive those 48 hours and take away a lot of, meaningful moments and people that I met. And after the fact, because I know I had no intentions of writing a book about this. I just, it was just an experience that I wanted to, share with other people. And it was an experience that I wanted to, to equip myself with so that I can be a better clinician. And then so the reaction from the community was very, there was a large reaction. A lot of people were interested in this experience because the local newspaper had followed me around and took some pictures, did some video, and wrote like a large, front page newspaper story about it. And so that's when I decided to, maybe I should, kind of give more people an idea of what this experience was like. And so that's when I decided to write about it when the pandemic hit because I had more time in my hands to write. And so I wrote the book, and so for me, I think one of the biggest takeaways is that anybody can be homeless or unsheltered. It doesn't matter, what, walk of life you come from. It can impact anyone, based upon just a number of different variables. And that's kind of what I learned from it, but also learned too that the challenges that it puts on your own mental health, right? My mental health was impacted. And again, I was only out on the streets for 48 hours. So just think about people who've been sheltered for,
For
months,
years.
years on end, just the
Yeah.
impact that it has on them, because say here I am only out for 48 hours. I wasn't sleeping at all. So I was starting like the second night that I was out, I was starting to hallucinate and hear and see things that weren't really there because my brain was the way it was trying to protect me. You go a long period of time without sleeping. Your brain, your mind is going to do
Right.
some funny things, and that started happening to me. On top of just the way people were treating me, and maybe to feel about myself, it was very grueling. It was very difficult, very taxing emotionally, and so that's why I tell people all the time, like, there's no way in the world that somebody can live out on the streets and not have their mental health impacted because of it. And so I think that because I see these random numbers thrown around, like, yeah, 40% of people that are unsheltered or have a mental health condition. And I'm like, I beg to differ. I would argue some of those numbers. I would probably put it closer to 80 or 90% of individuals that are living on the streets, probably have some type of mental health condition because it's traumatic. It's an unnatural environment, right? Somebody living in an unnatural environment. So if you're living in an environment that is not normal, you're going to have abnormal reactions or responses to living in that type of environment.
And that's a great point. You talk about chronic stress, and chronic stress automatically puts you in that fight or flight. And we know that our systems are activated and stay activated, right? And if we are never able to come down to that equilibrium, we're going to stay in that chronic stress state. And that brings me to another segment I really want to touch on, because it's so important for our community to understand what that looks like in everyday stress. We talk about transforming and expanding mental health access. And what does that look like for even our children who don't know necessarily how to communicate or articulate what it is that they're going through on the inside and how it manifests in either their behavior. I mean, we know for a fact that sleep deprivation, hunger issues, all of these factors, these external factors impact us.
Yes.
What does that look like on an everyday when people who are afraid to reach out and don't know that they're experiencing a crisis? Because I can tell you that when I lost my son, there have been many times that I didn't know in the moment, because you don't know when that shift happens.
Mm-hmm.
But when I walk away from it, because I do have a network of support, I can reflect and say, oh my goodness, I was in a crisis. And I didn't realize in the moment, because you're in such a survival, mode. But our children are experiencing that as well. And it manifests in behavior.
Mm-hmm.
Talk a little bit about that.
Yes, no, thank you for that question. I think it, like you alluded to, it looks different for, every person, right? So we're talking about children in particular. A lot of times for a lot of children, and again, it depends, because even boys and girls, a lot of times there can be some differences there in terms of how they manifest their behaviors.
Right.
Sometimes our boys may internalize things more so, but then you might see them acting out. So behaviorally, they might have behaviors, right? You might see behaviors, but then when it comes to being able to express themselves, then they keep it internalized, right. So they might not be able to share or articulate what they're actually feeling inside. But instead, they'll show how they're feeling based upon their behaviors, right? And so it's really different. I would say. I mean, one of the things that we know is that, unfortunately, suicidality. So we talk about suicidal rates, talk about suicidal ideation, it has increased amongst youth, especially youth of color, right? We're seeing a significant increase over the last few years when it comes to youth of color that are either taking their lives or attempting. And so it's very alarming. And so I think that, one of the things that from a cultural standpoint, I think culture also plays a big part of all of this too, in terms of, and when I say by culture, meaning like how we go about seeking help or asking for help, right? But then on the flip side of that is resources, where resources are available and resources are not available to us, right? Because we know that depending on what community or where you live in any respective city, your access to services and supports, can look a lot different than somebody who lives in in another zip code or area. And that's just the unfortunate reality, right? Their mental health crisis support, is very fragmented. And so I think that obviously, you're seeing a lot of efforts to correct that and to change that. And I definitely salute all the folks that are on the ground who really, like yourself, who are really, doing the work. But I think one of the biggest things, and this is for parents, caregivers, it's important that as the stage, as hard as it might be sometimes, is staying in tune with your kids, really. And I know sometimes we get busy, we got so many things going on, and sometimes it's not always easy to do that, right? But I think it's important that we're always staying in tune with our kids, and what I mean by that is even like on a daily basis, having like regular check-ins, checking in. Like, so for us, my family, one of the things that we started, getting back to is when it comes to like dinner, sitting down at the dinner table together and checking in on the day, how things are going, how school, how are you feeling about this? But being just really in tune, with, our kiddos is so important because I know for parents, like, especially in today's society with, these cell phones, I mean, these phones, I think have also made things even more challenging, than ever before. But I think that, just we're such in a hurry. We're what we call like a microwavable society, right? We where we need to get back more to the crock pot, in terms of slowing things
Yeah.
down and because everything's just everybody's in such a hurry. So when we're in a hurry, we miss things, we forget things, we don't, we're not always may not pay the same level of attention to things, right? And so I think it's sometimes just slowing things down, and even then we may miss things, but I think it's just very important that we know our kids. We know our parents know our kids better than anybody else does. So we know that let's say you have a son that's very active and outgoing. If he knows they're, a little bit more quieter than usual or more isolative, there might be a sign that something's going on. And so really checking in and seeing what is going on, with your son or daughter. We notice there's subtle behavioral changes or subtle changes in functioning. If their grades are starting to decline, or if they're not as motivated to go to school, or not as motivated to, to go to basketball practice, that could be a sign that something maybe more in a line is going on. So that's kind of my easy and short
Yeah.
response to that. Because like I say, every kid is so different.
Absolutely. And thank you for that. It's really important, especially in this day and age, where children are consumed with, social media and the pressures of social media. Finding that children are isolating themselves and losing interest. Those are definitely telltale signs of depression in a child, and they don't know how to articulate and speak on how they're feeling. And just hormonally, they go through changes biologically. They're going through these changes. So they're going through so many things. Mm-hmm. So thank you for that. Can you give us one or two tips for the community on how they can care for themselves?
Ooh, how can they care for themselves? I think the biggest thing is finding out what works for you, right? So if exercise is not your thing, Sylvia, but it's my thing, I'm probably not gonna recommend for you to exercise because you may hate me for it, and I don't want you to hate me. So one of the things as a clinician, I'm always trying to find like what are some things, what are some habits, what are some hobbies or things of interest that you like to do. So if it's reading a book, if it's if it's going on nice walks or hiking, or if it's talking to a close friend every day on the phone, like finding like at least two to three things that are very helpful to you. And I call them tools, having at least two or three tools in your toolbox, because if that one tool is not accessible for whatever reason, then you want to go to your B or your C option, right? And so I think it's very important to have at least two or three tools in your toolbox. For me, exercise is everything for me. I've started running more. Probably the last like 12 years or so, I've become a more avid runner. That does it for me. That helps me to decompress. It just does something for me where I'm able to get my mind off of things. And when I'm finished running, while I'm running, I'm able to get my mind off of things. When I'm finished running, I kind of have this feeling, of just feeling, refreshed, feeling replenished, every time after I run. And it's kind of, for some people might say, well, that's weird, because after I run, I'm like exhausted. Right. And I'm tired too, but that's what works for me. Another thing that works for me too, every morning I read a newspaper. Reading a newspaper, it sometimes there's gonna be some things in there that can cause me more stress, but for the most part, reading a newspaper is a way for me to kind of unwind and to also have an idea of what's going on. So yes.
Thank you so much for that. And this has been such a wonderful conversation. And I hope to have more conversations later, because this is just not, a 20, 30-minute conversation. There's so many things that we can get into when it comes to mental health awareness and advocacy. Thank you again, Dr. Jacobs, for being on the show and for sharing the awareness, the incredible work that you've done and continue to do. And we just want to bring and encourage our community to seek mental health. Again, if you find yourself in crisis, please call 988 or someone that you trust and love. Reach out. it is important that you reach out for and advocate for yourself. Thank you again for joining us at the Mother's Justice Show on 1155 KKNW. Thank you, everyone.